Dean Martin was staring at a contract worth $5 million when the man in the expensive suit leaned forward and said the quiet part out loud. "We just need you to distance yourself from the comedian. Publicly. You don't have to say anything mean. Just stop appearing with him. Let him fade out on his own." The room at the Beverly Hills Hotel went silent, except for the sound of ice melting in Dean's glass. 3 network executives, 2 lawyers, and Dean's own agent sat around the table, waiting. Outside, it was a perfect California afternoon in October 1975. Inside, they were asking Dean Martin to erase a man from his life for money. Dean took a sip of his drink. He looked at the contract. He looked at the men in their tailored suits with their rehearsed smiles and their briefcases full of other people's futures. And then Dean Martin said one word that would end the meeting, shock everyone in that room, and prove that some things matter more than being the highest-paid entertainer in America. But to understand why Dean responded the way he did, you need to understand what it feels like to be the one people want to erase. To understand what happened in that hotel room in 1975, you need to go back to 1946. Back to when Dean Martin was nobody, not Dean Martin the legend, not the king of cool. Just Dino Crocetti, a failed prizefighter from Steubenville, Ohio, who could carry a tune but couldn't catch a break. He was 29 years old and singing in mob-run clubs for $150 a week. He'd been married and divorced. He had a kid he could barely afford to support. And every night, he'd stand on stage in some smoky nightclub, singing to people who weren't listening, wondering if this was all his life would ever be. The entertainment industry in the late 1940s was brutal. If you weren't born into show business, if you didn't have connections, if you didn't have that indefinable it factor that executives could smell from across a room, you were invisible. Dean Martin was invisible. He'd been turned down by every major label, told his voice was too ethnic, told he didn't have star quality, told to go back to Ohio and get a real job. The rejection didn't make him bitter, it made him realistic. He knew the odds. He knew that for every Frank Sinatra who made it, there were 10,000 guys like him who'd spend their lives playing second-rate venues for third-rate money. But Dean kept singing, not because he thought he'd make it big, but because singing was the only thing that made sense in a world that didn't make sense. And then one night in July 1946, at the Glass Hat Club in New York City, Dean Martin met a 20-year-old Jewish kid from Newark who was bombing on stage so badly that people were throwing ice at him. Jerry Lewis. The partnership of Martin and Lewis is the stuff of legend now, but in 1946, it was an accident born of desperation. Jerry Lewis was a physical comedian, all manic energy and rubber faces and chaos. Dean Martin was the straight man, all cool, sophistication, and effortless charm. Together, they created something that had never existed before in American entertainment. By 1950, they were the biggest act in the country. Movies, radio, television, live performances. They were making millions. They were filling stadiums. They were unstoppable. But more importantly, they were partners. Dean, who'd spent years being invisible, suddenly had someone who believed in him. Jerry, who'd been bombing in nightclubs, suddenly had someone who made him funnier. They weren't just a comedy team. They were brothers. For 10 years, they were inseparable. They finished each other's sentences. They defended each other in meetings with studio executives. When the suits tried to pay Jerry more than Dean, Jerry refused until Dean got equal billing. When people tried to turn them against each other, they presented a united front, until they didn't. The breakup of Martin and Lewis in 1956 was messy, painful, and very public. There were creative differences, there were ego clashes, there were hurt feelings and angry words in a friendship that imploded under the pressure of fame and money and artistic vision. The last time they performed together was July 24, 1956, at the Copacabana in New York. They barely spoke to each other off stage. When the show ended, they went their separate ways without saying goodbye. The entertainment industry assumed Dean Martin's career was over. Jerry Lewis was the funny one. Jerry was the star. Dean was just the handsome guy who sang songs and gave Jerry someone to play off of. They were wrong. Dean Martin became a massive solo star, bigger than he'd ever been with Jerry. His records sold millions. His television variety show, The Dean Martin Show, became one of the highest-rated programs in America. His movies were box office gold, but the experience of being dismissed, of being told he was nothing without his partner, of having to prove himself all over again, left a mark on Dean Martin that never fully healed. He remembered what it felt like to be counted out, to be written off, to have people bet against you because you didn't fit their idea of what a star should be. And that memory would shape the most important decision Dean Martin would ever make. October 1975. Dean Martin was 58 years old and at the absolute peak of his television career. The Dean Martin Show was in its 9th season and pulling in 30 million viewers a week. He was one of the most recognized faces in America. He could have his pick of any project, any deal, any opportunity. NBC, the network that aired his show, was happy, but not satisfied. They wanted to lock Dean into an exclusive contract that would keep him on NBC for the next 5 years. More money than any entertainer in television history. Complete creative control. Anything he wanted. There was just one problem. Dean had been using his show to help other comedians, up-and-coming guys who needed a break, guys who reminded him of himself back in CADO 1946, hungry and talented but invisible to the people who mattered. One comedian in particular had become a regular on Dean's show, a guy named Dom DeLuise. Dom was funny, genuinely, brilliantly funny. He could make Dean break character on live television, which almost never happened. He could improvise, he could sing, he could do physical comedy that rivaled the greats, but the network executives didn't see it that way. They saw the ratings data. They saw that episodes featuring Dom DeLuise performed slightly lower than episodes with bigger-name guests. They saw what they always saw, numbers on a spreadsheet, and they wanted Dom gone. Not just from Dean's show, from television entirely if they could manage it. Dom was signed to an NBC development deal that Dean had personally advocated for. The network wanted out of it. They wanted to use their finite resources on proven talent. So when NBC's main competitor, ABC, came calling with an offer for Dean Martin, they saw an opportunity. ABC wanted Dean. Badly. They were willing to pay almost anything, and they didn't care about Dom DeLuise one way or another. The meeting was scheduled for 2:09 p.m. on October 14, 1975, at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Dean showed up at 2:45 because Dean Martin was never on time for anything that involved network executives. His agent, Mort Viner, was already there, along with 3 executives from ABC and their legal team. The setup was casual. Martinis and small talk and leather chairs arranged around a coffee table in a private suite, but everyone in that room knew what was really happening. This was a negotiation, and the stakes were enormous. The lead executive, a man named Leonard Goldenson, got right to the point. ABC wanted Dean Martin. They were prepared to offer him a deal that would make him the highest-paid entertainer on American television. $5 million over 3 years, plus profit participation, plus complete creative control. Dean nodded, sipped his drink, said nothing. Goldenson continued. We know you're loyal to NBC. We respect that. But loyalty is a two-way street, Dean, and we're prepared to show you the kind of loyalty that NBC has frankly taken for granted. One of the other executives slid a folder across the table. Dean didn't open it. Everything's in there, the executive said. Primetime slot, your choice of format, guest stars you approve. We'll build the entire Tuesday night lineup around you. Dean still said nothing. His agent, Mort, was sweating. This was the biggest deal of his career, and Dean looked like he was barely paying attention. There's just one small thing, Goldenson said, his tone shifting slightly. We've done our research. We've looked at your ratings, and there are some underperforming elements that we think are holding the show back. Dean's eyes narrowed slightly. Just slightly. We're talking about some of the recurring guests, Goldenson continued. Specifically, we're concerned about Dom DeLuise. He's talented, no question. But the data shows that when he's on the show, you lose about 15% of your male demographic. We think with the right guest lineup, we could add 5 million viewers. The room went quiet. Mort Viner looked like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. The ABC executives waited. Dean took another sip of his drink. Then he spoke for the first time since sitting down. Dom's funny, Dean said. Of course he is, Goldenson said quickly. No one's questioning his talent. We're just talking about the business reality. Television is about numbers, Dean. You know that. Dean nodded slowly. What do you want me to do? Goldenson leaned forward. We just need you to distance yourself from the comedian. Publicly. You don't have to say anything mean. Just stop appearing with him. Let him fade out on his own. Your NBC deal has him locked into that development contract. If you walk, NBC will drop him to save money. Problem solved. Everyone moves forward. One of the lawyers chimed in. It's just business, Mr. Martin. These things happen all the time. No hard feelings. It's how the industry works. Dean looked at the contract folder on the table. $5 million creative control. The biggest deal in television. All he had to do was abandon a friend. Mort Viner tried to jump in. Dean, maybe we should... Dean held up his hand. Mort went silent. The room held its breath. Outside, someone was playing tennis on the hotel courts. The sound of the ball hitting the racket echoed faintly through the window. Inside, 6 men waited to see if Dean Martin valued friendship or money. Dean stood up. He didn't pick up the folder. He didn't shake anyone's hand. He looked at Leonard Goldenson and said one word. No, the room erupted. Wait, Dean, let's just talk about this. Mr. Martin, I don't think you understand what you're turning down. But Dean was already walking toward the door. Mort Viner scrambled to follow him, grabbing his briefcase and stammering apologies to the ABC executives. In the hallway, Mort caught up to Dean. Jesus Christ, Dean, do you know what you just did? That was $5 million. That was... Dean stopped walking. He turned to face his agent. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but absolutely firm. I know what it was, Mort, and I know what they wanted me to do to get it. It's just business, Mort said desperately. You heard them. It happens all the time. Dom would understand. He's a professional. He knows how this works. Dean shook his head. You remember 1946, Mort? You remember when I couldn't get a gig anywhere? When every label told me I wasn't good enough? You remember who gave me a shot? Mort didn't answer. People, Dean said. People who didn't have to. People who saw something in me when the suits with their spreadsheets saw nothing. Jerry Lewis saw something. The guy at the glass hat who let us improvise saw something. Every club owner who took a chance on an Italian kid from Ohio saw something. He started, walking again. Mort followed. Dom's funny, Dean continued. He makes people laugh. He makes me laugh. And these guys want me to throw him away because he doesn't test well with men aged 25 to 54? Because he cost them money on a development deal they never wanted to honor in the first place? They reached the elevator. Dean pressed the button. I've got enough money, Mort. I've got more money than I know what to do with. What I don't have enough of is friends. The elevator arrived. Dean stepped in. Before the doors closed, he looked at his agent one more time. Call NBC, tell them I'm staying, and tell them Dom's staying too. The fallout from Dean's decision was immediate and widespread. ABC was furious. They leaked the story to the trade papers, spinning it as Dean Martin turning down the deal of the century for sentimental reasons. The implication was clear. Dean was past his prime, making emotional decisions instead of business ones. NBC was thrilled but confused. They'd been preparing to lose Dean to ABC. Now he was staying, but with a new demand. Dom DeLuise's development deal would be honored in full, and Dom would continue to appear on Dean's show regardless of what the ratings said. NBC agreed. They didn't have much choice. Dom DeLuise found out about the whole thing 3 days later when Dean called him personally. Dom, it's Dean. Hey, Dean, what's going on? I just wanted you to know that ABC offered me a pile of money to leave NBC and dump you in the process. There was silence on the other end of the line. I told them no, Dean said. You're funny, kid. Don't let anybody tell you different, Dom DeLuise cried. Right there on the phone. This man who'd spent years being told he was too fat, too loud, too much, too ethnic, broke down because someone had chosen him over $5 million. Dean, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, Dean said. Just keep being funny. That's all I need. The story didn't end there. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. Dom DeLuise went on to become one of the most beloved comedic actors in Hollywood. He appeared in Mel Brooks films. He had his own television specials. He became a star in his own right, not because some executive decided he tested well, but because Dean Martin had given him a platform when it mattered most. Years later, in 1993, Dom was asked about Dean Martin in an interview. By then, Dean was in his late 70s and had largely retired from public life. Dom was asked what he thought Dean's legacy would be. Dom got emotional. People talk about Dean's singing. They talk about his acting. They talk about the Rat Pack. But you know what I think about? I think about a man who had everything to gain and chose friendship instead. That's Dean's legacy. He was loyal when loyalty cost him something, the interviewer pressed further. Do you really think he gave up that much? He was already wealthy. Dom shook his head. You don't understand. It wasn't about the money. It was about what saying yes would have meant. It would have meant becoming the kind of person who throws people away when they are inconvenient. Dean Martin refused to be that person, and in an industry full of people who are that person, that's revolutionary. Frank Sinatra heard about what Dean had done. He called Dean the night after the ABC meeting. You turned down $5 million, Frank said. I did. For Dom DeLuise? For Dom DeLuise. Frank was quiet for a moment, then he laughed. You crazy bastard. You know they're saying you're finished, right? That you've lost your edge? They said that in 1956 too, Dean replied. Didn't stick then, won't stick now. You could have had anything, Frank said. Complete control, name your price. All you had to do was cut one guy loose. I know, another pause. Then Frank said something he rarely said to anyone. I'm proud of you, Dean. Thanks, Pally. But you're still an idiot, Dean laughed. Probably. The truth about that meeting in October 1975 reveals something about Dean Martin that the cool persona always obscured. Beneath the laid-back attitude, beneath the drink he always held but rarely drank, beneath the carefully cultivated image of a man who didn't care about anything, was someone who cared deeply about the things that actually mattered. Dean Martin understood something that most people in Hollywood never figured out. Success without integrity is just noise. Money without loyalty is just paper. Fame without friendship is just loneliness with better lighting. He'd been on both sides of the equation. He'd been the guy everyone wanted when he was part of Martin and Lewis, and he'd been the guy everyone dismissed when that partnership ended. He knew what it felt like to be valuable and to be disposable, and he made a choice about which kind of person he wanted to be. The executives at ABC never understood it. To them, Dean's decision was irrational, emotional, a sign that he was past his prime and making soft-headed choices. But Dean Martin wasn't being emotional. He was being clear-eyed about what he valued, and what he valued was the kind of loyalty that can't be bought, sold, or negotiated. The Dean Martin Show continued on NBC for another 2 years after the ABC meeting. Dom DeLuise appeared in dozens of episodes. The ratings remained strong. Dean remained one of the highest-paid entertainers on television. But more importantly, Dean Martin went to bed each night knowing he hadn't betrayed a friend for money. In his final years, when Dean had largely withdrawn from public life, when the legend of the Rat Pack had been reduced to old clips and nostalgia, when most of his contemporaries were gone, Dom DeLuise visited him regularly. They'd sit in Dean's house on Mountain Drive, watching old westerns, telling jokes, not talking about much of anything important. Just two old friends spending time together. Dom was there almost until the end. And when Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995, Dom DeLuise gave a eulogy that made almost no mention of Dean's career. Instead, he talked about kindness, about loyalty, about a man who chose people over profit when profit was the easier choice. Dean Martin was offered millions to betray a friend, Dom said. His answer was one word, just one word, that changed my life and showed me what real integrity looks like. That word was no. And it taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is also the simplest. The story of that meeting in the Beverly Hills Hotel in October 1975 never made it into the official Dean Martin biographies. It was too small, too personal, too quiet for a man whose life was defined by big moments, big stages, big performances. But for Dom DeLuise, it was the biggest thing that ever happened to him. Not because it made him famous, but because it showed him that he mattered to someone when the world was trying to convince him that he didn't. And for Dean Martin, it was confirmation of something he'd always known, but had to keep proving to himself, that he was more than the image, more than the persona, more than the cool, detached performer who seemed to glide through life without letting anything touch him. He was a man who remembered what it felt like to be invisible. And when given the choice between 5 million and making sure someone else didn't feel invisible, he chose the person. Every single time. There's a recording that exists from The Dean Martin Show in late 1975, just a few weeks after the ABC meeting. Dom DeLuise is a guest. They're doing a sketch together, something silly about a restaurant with terrible service. In the middle of the sketch, Dean breaks character. Just for a second. He looks at Dom, and there's something in his expression that the audience couldn't have understood. But Dom understood. It was a look that said, "We're good. You're here. That's what matters." Dom nearly breaks down right there on stage, but he doesn't. He makes a joke instead. The audience laughs. Dean laughs. The sketch continues. But if you watch that clip closely, if you know the context, if you understand what Dean Martin had just turned down and why, you can see something rare in show business. You can see genuine friendship. You can see loyalty that costs something. You can see a man who meant it when he said that some things matter more than money. That moment, captured on grainy videotape from 1975, is worth more than 5 million. It's worth more than the highest-rated show on television. It's worth more than any contract, any deal, any piece of paper that promises creative control and profit participation. It's worth everything because it's real. And in an industry built on illusions, real is the rarest thing of all. Dean Martin was offered millions to betray a friend. His answer was one word. That word was no. And that no said everything about who Dean Martin really was. Not the character he played on stage, not the legend that's been packaged and sold for decades. But the man underneath all of that. The man who remembered being invisible. The man who chose to make sure someone else didn't disappear. The man who understood that at the end of your life, when the applause fades and the cameras stop rolling and the contracts are all fulfilled, the only thing that matters is whether you were loyal when loyalty cost you something. Dean Martin was loyal, and it cost him $5 million. He never regretted it for a second.